Welcome back, welcome back. That was Barry White doing his thing. He's last, he's the first, he was everything. He was, again, I must be playing people, everyone who's passed away today. I might try and find a few live people to talk to. Okay, so welcome to the second half of the show, and I want to bring in Hari Parekh, who is our guest today. He is a assistant psychologist. I'm going to say that wrong, and he's done some research. A paper called Apostates, a hidden population of abuse. Welcome, Hari. Oh, this isn't. Hold on. Hello there, Hari. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, brilliant. Sorry, I thought you'd lost you there for a while. Oh, gosh, me and this technology. So you've been doing some research, and thank you very much for being part of today's show. For those of you that may be new to the show, I am a humanist, and Hari is one of a humanist as well. But he's one of them. There's a few of us around. I also wanted to kind of link in that before I speak to Hari about Mubarak Bala. And Hari, I'm sure you're aware of his situation. He's the president of the Nigerian Humanist Association, and I had Leo Igwe on here a couple of weeks ago, and I've been trying to give people updates, and there isn't really much happening in terms of, we don't know where Mubarak is. We don't know, he hasn't seemed to have had any legal representation still, and we're looking at 2 weeks. We do know that there has been, I understand that there's another kind of hit list of other people that were part of the Humanist Association that are now being put on a hit list, and they are, also in danger. And I think this kind of links in nicely to the kind of things that you have been looking at and researching. So your paper is about apostates and that hidden population of abuse. So just to start things off, let's just think about, just tell the listeners, apostasy, apostates, who are they, what are they, and why is it important?
We can also link it to Mubarak Bala as well because of the situation at the moment. So what is an apostate and what is apostasy? So an apostate is the term used to describe people within religious families who once identified as religious or with a belief in God and have now ceased to believe in the existence of a God, gods, or having a religious faith or belief, and identify as a result as non-religious. The term apostasy is given to describe that transition from being religious to non-religious.
Perfect. So I said, and exactly that's what's happened to Mubarak. He raised a Muslim. He has now denounced Islam, and is now the president of a humanist association. So, and he's been arrested. There's a whole kind of whole threat to his very life. So, why did you feel the need to do any kind of research into this subject?
So back in, this is a bit of ancient history now, but back in 2015, I was working for the student sector of Humanist UK, and as a result of working for the student sector, I came across the fabulous Alia Salim and Imtiaz Shams, who they had their organisation called Faith the Faithless at the time, and what I found was that they talked to me about the different life stories that people have leaving their religious faith, and how difficult that is, and all of the kind of pressures and the stresses that people go through having left their religious faith, whether that's based on isolation or being kicked out of the family or being abused as a result, being threatened to be killed and assaulted and psychologically abused and all these kind of things that they would talk about. And there I was, who, I left my religious faith back in 2013, for example, and I had none of that. I was really lucky. I told my mum and dad, and things were okay, and life continued as normal. And that's a big anomaly within the apostate community, to not have gone through those kind of experiences. And I think that it's a very unique perspective to have, where, you know, I didn't go through all of those tricky areas and tricky situations. So being aware of that by working with them, what I realized was actually there's something in this, you know, people going through these things just because they've made a choice or a perspective change, or they've made that's different to the family or the household, doesn't equate to somebody being abused for that. And at the time, I was doing my master's at the University of Nottingham in forensic and criminological psychology. So I was trying to come up with a research topic and was failing miserably at the time because I couldn't think of one. And Vincent Egan, who's the second author on the paper, he was my supervisor, and he said, "Harry, what's your what interests you?" And I was like, "Well, here's an idea." I was like, "Look, there's this thing that people are being abused because they're not religious anymore, and I think there are people out there." And he's like, "Well, that's interesting." I said, "What's even more interesting is that there's nothing out there to argue this within the kind of scientific literature either." And he's like, "Well, that's even more interesting. Maybe that's got legs." So that's how it started. So it's kind of my opportunity to kind of support or give voice to those that have, been through really difficult times, and being able to scientifically and evidently putting their story out there to the academic community to say, "Hey, look, here's the science on this topic that activists have been spending many a year, highlighting and shouting about and arguing about. We finally have the evidence for academics to see that there are abuse victims out there as a result of becoming an apostate." So that's the backstory.
And I think it's really important, because I think we know the stories, but when they're only there's this, we have the one story, of somebody, we may know somebody and they lost a home, but when you kind of have a whole kind of body of evidence, you kind of then have it kind of has something to sit on. So what were the main findings of your research?
So exactly right, Audrey. That's the greatest thing about it, that we finally, people finally have it. I mean, we looked at, we weren't kind of bottlenecking ourselves and going, we need to show that this exists. The aim was to go, let's do a piece of research to see if it does exist, and that's what we found. So it was the first of its kind to kind of scientifically provide the evidence with a worldwide sample that there are apostates who are hidden populations of abuse victims within religious households. Out of the 228 people that we had as participants, obviously finding a hidden population is difficult because they're hidden. We were supported really well by Humanists UK, Faith to Faithless, the Peter Tatchell Foundation, and the Council of Ex-Muslims for Britain at the same time to find all of these people. So what we found was we had an increase of 1,033% of people identifying as non-religious currently, and we had a decrease between 91% and 94% of people identifying as either Christian or Muslim. Now, the interesting part of that is that actually, when we did the study, we had more people identifying as Christian initially than they did as Muslim. So we had 130 people identifying as Christians. That went down to 12. We had 68 people identifying as Muslim. That went down to 4. We had 18 people identifying as non-religious. That went up to 204. So again, that was a big change within that kind of stats, and that shows the current trends within the census data or current society, where there's a lot more kind of non-religious people about. So that showed that what we then did is we used something called a conflict tactics scale by Strauss and colleagues to see whether victims were reporting their abuse. So that ranged from assault, serious assault, or psychological abuse. So the difference between them is assault and serious assault is the difference between being punched or thrown against the wall to being threatened to be killed or threatened to be severely harmed. And psychological abuse is looking at things like coercive control, stress, pressure, and kind of neglect in those areas as well. And what we found was despite having a smaller population of smaller sample size of people from a Muslim heritage and household, what we found was they were more statistically significant to actually be a victim of such abuse. So despite the smaller numbers for a Muslim household, that we were able to show that there was an increasing likelihood of them being victims to that. And actually, Christian being from a Christian household wasn't far off, but it just wasn't as much as that Muslim household. So there's something in this to show that, you know, that there's something going on there. And on top of that, we also looked at things like negotiation. So, you know, how do people kind of negotiate or understand an issue, and how do they kind of come to a culmination of where they're at? And we found that to not be significant. So what we understood by that was that perhaps when people are identifying themselves as apostates within the household, families are taken aback by that, they're confused by that. If you take the perspective of the religion, then, you know, why would they do that if they know what happens to an apostate and they're perhaps that kind of remit? You know, it's kind of that, you know, if you know so much about what happens to people who lead their religious faith, why would you go through that?
Yeah.
My childhood or something like that. And actually, perhaps what the issue is that because this issue falls on the non-computing kind of, you know, it doesn't compute within the framework that they've got, that means that perhaps it causes a lack of negotiation or a lack of support, therefore, within that family home, because they were unable to understand it and unable to kind of figure it out. So that was interesting too, and that obviously breeds that environment that is not as tolerable either. Finally, what we found was, out of the 154 people who were assaulted, only 9 of those people reported their assault to the police, which is only 5.8%. Out of the 71 people who said why they didn't report their abuse, 44% believed it would be disrespectful to the family dynamics and a betrayal of the family. 27% said that the police would be unable to help them. 10% were threatened by further or perceived repercussions by the family and community for reporting their abuse. So here we have victims openly stating they could be at risk. Now, this, just as a final point, this isn't to state that every religious household out there, whether it's Christian or Muslim, is likely to abuse the apostate within it. It's just suggesting that there's a higher likelihood of this to occur. We did look at other religious faiths, but when you're doing statistical kind of tests, they just weren't significant enough to include. And that's what the study shows.
Wow, I mean, there's a whole lot there, kind of thing. I suppose what it does, we do know that, I'm going to say, I was looking at Islam, looking at Muslim families at the moment, there is this higher idea that, you know, that there is a tendency to be more, and I'm not even going to say abusive, but less understanding of the idea that you can be non-religious. So when we're looking at, did you find anything? Are we looking at, when we're looking at Christians, were we looking at Christians from an African background? Were we looking at Christians from, you know, white British? Was there that kind of breakdown? And I know maybe you couldn't get that in a study, but I'm just trying to think of things in that way.
Yeah. I think that what we wanted to do was we really, because this study hasn't been done before, that provided us with a lot of ground to kind of cover in highlighting whether this abuse was rampant within religious households, for example. Now, as a result of that, what we did is we kind of umbrella categorized everybody within a within a faith in itself. So rather than looking at the sects of each religion, so for example, Christianity, you've got Catholicism, you've got, you know, Church of England, you've got Seventh-day Adventists, Mormon. You know, there's also parts of the Christian faith that aren't also deemed as Christian, for example, like Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and Scientology and things like that. So, and in Islam, you've got Shia, Sunni, you know, Ahmadiyya, for example, that might not be considered, but it is. You've got Wahhabism, Sufism, for example, just to name a few. So we didn't, unfortunately, look at categorizing people based on the individual sect of the religious faith. What we really wanted to do at that moment in time, was to basically just see if the data suggests whether this is happening or not. And the fact that it is happening within the umbrella terms, that provides us with the scope for future research to denominate that a little bit more. So maybe we could in the future see whether evangelical Christians within within black families to white families, maybe there's a difference there in the way that it's perceived, or we can do those kind of tests later on in the future. But for now, what we wanted to show to this academic community and wider society really and worldwide is that, look, here is abuse that people haven't realized exists. We're basically it's very similar to the lines of saying, all those years ago, that, by the way, there's a thing called domestic violence and it occurs in the house. Are you aware of that? Yeah. And it's a little bit like that in the education of this issue as well, in going, this can happen, right? And a lot of people, it's very, not many people know that you can even leave your religious faith, let alone get abused for it. So there's a lot of education there as well required for people to understand what it is. And we've done that in the UK with things like forced marriage and FGM and, and honor-based violence. So why not add the extra strain on?
Yeah, I can see that we have come a long way, and I also wanted to sort of emphasize, although we're talking about Islam and we're talking about religion, it isn't to malign any particular group of people, but it is to highlight that actually there is an issue, because until we actually name the pain, no one actually will do anything or say anything. And also it means that people can't then, when they if they're not going to report it, how are the police going to deal with it? How are social services going to deal with it if they don't actually think it's a thing?
And you've tipped on the most important point, in that the police are just as, they don't know that this exists. So how can they support victims within that area? And this is one of the issues. I mean, when we look at Mubarak Bala's case in Nigeria, sadly the issue is that he was, he wrote a Facebook post, and they've argued to a point. I spoke to Leo not so long ago that, that was insulting to religion, and they've got him on a blasphemy law, which at the same time in the Nigerian kind of constitution, in the legal framework, you've also got the freedom of thought and the freedom to think and the freedom to have ideas. Do you know what I mean? But you can't equate a blasphemy law with the freedom either. So it creates a case for, against blasphemy laws in itself. But what I want to kind of pick on is that when a family struggles with this notion of apostasy and the concern of how that might affect the honor of that family household, when that grows from the household to communities, to societies, to nation states, where being offended by having a difference of thought is then integrated within a criminal justice legislation, such as in Nigeria, that creates a society where no human being is free to think about. It's not free to think differently about anything that matters to the people around them. You've got the sword of Damocles hanging over you, regardless of whatever you think and whatever you do. And when the criminal justice system is used on the rationale of people feeling offended to its full extent and even death, then basically what you've got is a criminal justice system that is enacting itself as the abuser within that remit rather than the supporter. So there's a lot of work there to be done.
So this study took place in Britain, and so we're looking at people who are in the UK going through this, which I think is something that I think people didn't really highlight.
No, Audrey. It was we got a sample of people throughout the world.
Throughout the world. Okay.
Yeah, it's a small. This is the problem. We only had 228 people. It was worldwide. So we got people from Pakistan, the Middle East, America, the UK, Europe, places in Africa. Like, we got people from everywhere. Finding hidden people is obviously very difficult.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that's still worrying that there are people out there across the world that are just who are hidden. And when we look at Mubarak, when we look at the cases of blasphemy, this law, when we look at people who have been attacked for just doing something that we would consider minor when we're trying to sort of weigh up our freedoms with other people's freedoms. And we do need to have mechanisms, and I think this kind of research is a good mechanism for actually highlighting and actually allowing people, as you say, giving them a voice to sort of say, actually look at what's going on. But then what do we do now that you've done your research and we've kind of had this kind of thing? What happens now with it? What do we do? How do we move on for it? How do we get someone to do something about it?
I think that's the beauty of doing research, in that it splits twofold. So the first part of this research is to get it out there. So, with COVID-19 at the moment, it obviously makes it difficult to attend the conferences and attend the opportunities, so that one can kind of inform, peers within psychology that, by the way, guys, here's something that exists that nobody's really looked at, at all. The problem with the research itself is that, no wonder it's not been done before, because if you don't know this issue exists, how are you then going to know about it? So it's about educating those kind of professionals into becoming aware that this is a thing and this exists. So that's the first thing. Secondly, with professionals in psychology and with science, as you know, once one person writes something, there will be more people that look at it, attempt to, redo it, and attempt to figure out whether it's valid and whether there's something in it. And, that's all welcome. So hopefully this creates or starts off people on their kind of journeys of academic pursuit in looking at apostasy, and looking at apostasy with abuse as well. So hopefully this creates the next, number of people that publish, the kind of scope to lean on, for example, seeing as it's the first part. And as a result of academics becoming more aware of it, this increases the likelihood of kind of people within governments or people within politics to then become aware of it. This creates the opportunity for people outside of the activist arena to become aware of it. And hopefully that way it will then work its way into, credible people realizing that actually we've missed out. We've missed victims here. And one victim missed is more than one victim that we want. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is this provides the activist, this provides that person who's arguing about, apostasy, to have the evidence and backup to say, look, the evidence is out there, it does exist. And on top of that, actually, there are a number of people that I've spoken to that are religious, that one can't believe that people are using this as a rationale to abuse people for. So it provides those people who are kind of detested by the fact that people are using their religious faith as an MO, or as a modus operandi to abuse people with, and it provides them the opportunity to say, well, actually, this isn't good enough, and this isn't right, and you've only got to look at the the Maginot Noir's quote of no idea above scrutiny, no person below dignity, to suggest that creates the opportunity for people within their faiths to kind of go, well, actually, what are we doing here for human beings? I get what the scripture says, but then again, no one should be abused just for having a difference of thought, and that's the point. So hopefully it supports that opportunity as well on top. So yeah, it's kind of twofold but multi-pronged in that way.
Wow, it sounds amazing. My last question, and really is, what are your hopes for the future? Where do you hope that this all sort of ends up, really?
I think the hope for the future is that further organizations such as places like United Nations, Amnesty International, etc., kind of get a hold of it and can kind of go, wow, we've missed, or we haven't had that evidence before to argue that this is a population of people that are being abused. What can we then do to support people within nation states where they have blasphemy laws, where they have practices which can be challenging? You only have to look at the Aisha Bibi case that was prior to the Mubarak bala case to show that actually there's more that needs to be done within nation states that have blasphemy laws in itself. You have to look at the Raif Badawi case, for example, in Saudi Arabia. So I think that's where it needs to kind of go in relation to being used within lay conversation and within public conversation and within the official conversations, to show that we really need to look at the fact we need to look at the fact that abuse is abuse, and we, regardless of whether people are using their religious faith or their cultural identity or traditional values as the reason for it, it doesn't matter. Abuse is abuse.
Abuse is abuse. Well, Harry, I want to thank you for this. This has been, we talk about, I don't always talk about religion, but we do have to highlight the different aspects, because we know that there are religious people out there who are just doing their thing every day. But we do have to be in a position to challenge those aspects of religion that are not good for society, that are actually detrimental to society, and are actually affecting ordinary people. And I think this piece of research is really a good start. And we're really grateful to for you to take in the time to actually just say, stop, look, listen, this is what's happening, this is real, and that we really need to start thinking about this. And in conjunction with Mubarak and what's going on, we have live examples of this. This isn't something that, even though you've done your research, this is live. This is people's lives that are affected. But if we're looking at, the Mubaraks of this world, we also know that there are average, ordinary people who are being made homeless, who are under threat, who are just trying to live an ordinary life, but are then also under threat. And we know, we need to be much more aware of that. Is there anything else one last little message that you want to give out to the people before I let you go? Oh, is he gone again? Oh.
No, you got me.
Oh, okay, brilliant. I just know that this lead is there's a little thing. Sorry, just before, I want to thank you for taking the time to sort of go through the research and to actually highlight some of these issues that and they're going to be ongoing issues. I know that we are not going to have, this isn't going to be the last conversation that we have, and I'm sure that I'll invite you back again when you do your next piece of research, the next stage and the next step in sort of taking this further. So thank you, Hari. Thank you for taking the time out today, and I'll speak to you anon. Oh, there he goes. Hello.
Yeah, you got me.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I just think so take care. Thank you very much for being a part of today's show. It was really useful, really helpful, really informative.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me.
No worries. You take care. Bye-bye. Okay, let's just play a little tune now to kind of set things off.
So